Hi there and welcome back to this series on building mobile extensions. By now you should have a pretty good understanding of the core JSON files that make up a mobile extension. In this session we're going to take it up a notch and build a mobile extension that will interact with the data from our Skedulo environment. So given we're going to start working with data, there are a couple of extra pieces of configuration we need to support this requirement. Let's get stuck in. So in this session we're going to build a mobile extension that will display all the contacts associated with an account in Skedulo. So the first thing we're going to do is set up a new folder for the mobile extension. Let's call it Account Contacts. And just like in our Hello World example from part 3, we're also going to create some of the basic JSON files that define our mobile extension. So let's go ahead and create our state file. So let's create a new file called accountcontacts.mobileextension.json. And for the sake of simplicity, let's store it outside the account contacts folder just like we did for the Hello World state file. And in that file, I'd like you to copy the configuration from the first link in the description below and paste it into your file. Just like in the Hello World example, this is just some very basic information that captures the name of the mobile extension, as well as defines where the source code for the mobile extension is stored within the file system, which is important when we tell the CLI to deploy the mobile extension. Next, let's create the mex_definition folder within the account contact folder. And loose within the account contacts folder, let's also create our upload_config.json file. Given we've already covered these off in the previous example, I won't go into detail on what these files are for, but you can find the configuration for the upload_config.json file in the links within the description below. So by now you should have a new state file created at the root level, as well as an account contacts folder with a mex_definition folder inside it, and an upload_config.json file within the account contacts folder that looks like this. Next, let's create the metadata.json file. You can find the configuration for this file in the third link in the description. The main difference to call out with this mobile extension is that we want it to show up when we're looking at a job in the Skedulo Plus mobile app. And for that reason, you will notice we've set the context object to jobs. You will also notice the display order is also set to 0, which means if we had multiple mobile extensions, this mobile extension would be displayed first. Next, let's go ahead and define the data we need for our mobile extension. For this, we'll need to create a new file within the mex_definition folder called instancefetch.json. The reason why it's called instance fetch, by the way, is because it's the data that's specific to the instance of the job we're looking at on the device. So in this example, our list of contacts would be different for each job, assuming that the account or the customer is also different. So given we want a list of contacts specific to the account associated with the job, we need to perform a GraphQL query to get this data. You can get the configuration for this file from the fourth link in the description below. But let's also take a moment to go over the configuration of this file. First, the type will need to be set to GraphQL. Then we can give a name to our query. Let's keep it simple and call it contacts. The object name will be the same too. From here, we need to define which fields we want returned for each contact. But we don't want to fetch every single contact in our environment, as that would result in sending a lot of unnecessary data to the device. We only want to send the contacts specific to the job we're looking at. This is where we apply a filter to our query. In this case, we're filtering the list of contacts based on the account ID of the job that is being accessed. To demonstrate the use of query variables, we've created a variable here called ACCUID, which we have set to it.accountID. Now, out of the box, you get access to nearly all job attributes via the IT prefix, where IT is just short for instance. So said another way, we're using it.accountID to get the account ID of the job being accessed from the mobile device, and then setting it to the variable ACCUID, which is then used in our filter. With respect to the static fetch.json file, we do need to create it, however we don't need to configure this file for this example. The difference between these two files when it comes to fetching data is that the instance fetch data changes from job to job, whereas the static fetch data is the same set of data every time the mobile extension is opened. A couple of practical examples of this are fetching a product or an inventory list. The good news is that mechanically it's configured in the exact same way as the instance fetch file, so it's just as easy to configure. Next, we're going to work on the uidef.json file as well as the en.json language file. Remember, the language file is created within a folder called locales, which is within our static_resources folder. You can fetch the configuration for the uidef.json file from the 5th link in the description, and the configuration for the en.json file from the 6th. For the sake of efficiency, I actually work on these side by side and build them more or less at the same time. It is a little bit bigger than our Hello World example from part 3, but the principles are exactly the same. We just have a few more components being displayed in the UI. Okay, let's go ahead and break down the uidef.json file piece by piece. The first thing we're going to look at is that our uidef.json file now contains multiple pages. Firstly, we have a list page, and then we have the page where we view our additional contact information. Again, what you call the pages are entirely up to you. Okay, now let's start looking at the configuration for the first page, the contacts list page. A key difference from our Hello World example is that this type of page is a list page. We have the title of the page, and if we look in the en.json file, we can see that the variable is set to contacts. And when we open our mobile extension, you will see that contacts is what is displayed at the top. You will also notice that we have functionality to add a new contact. This is defined by the add new object in the uidef file. So when we expand this configuration, you can see that we are able to define the text that displays on the button, as well as the page the user is taken to when they tap on the button. You can see this takes the user to our second page, Upsert Contact page. Because we're creating a contact record, we also want to populate the account the contact is related to. We already know this information because our job is connected to an account already. So if we look at the default data object, you can see we can pass data into the newly created record in addition to what the user enters. So in this case, we have the metadata.job.accountID, and we set the object name to the name of the object we are inserting records into. Right, source expression. This is where we tell our list page the data we want it to display. So you'll remember earlier on we configured our instance_fetch.json file, and we gave our query a name called contacts. So we combine the results from this query to our list page by simply prefixing the name of the query with form data. So formdata.contacts. We've also added the ability to search the list of data. This is defined in our search object, which has two properties, placeholder and filter on properties. The placeholder property is simply the text displayed to the user in the search input. So we just need to point this to a key in our language file. In this case, it's pointing to search placeholder, which is set to search for contact. And our other property defines the field values you want the user to be able to search on. So in this case, just the contact's name. Just remember that you will need to make sure any fields you want to filter on, or indeed use anywhere else in the mobile extension, need to be in your instance_fetch.json file. The item layout object controls how each of our records are presented within the list. I'm using 3 properties for this example: type, title, and caption. The type we will set to title and caption. This means each record in this list will have both a title and a caption. For each item in our list, we want to display the contact name as the title, so you will see our uidef.json is pointing to the item title key, and you can see it looks a little different to other static values we've defined in our language file. We can actually also define values dynamically in our language files. Just keep in mind that the language displayed is the data that's stored in Skedulo. It won't be translated. And finally, let's look at item caption. We can get creative with how we display dynamic data. So here I'm actually going to inject 2 contact attributes, title and phone, into the caption on a new line denoted by /n in my configuration. And our very last piece of configuration for the list page is to define where the user should be taken when they tap on an item. You will see here that the item click destination is set to the name of the second page within the uidef.json file, and that's all we need to do there. Okay, that covers off our list page, but before we move on to the second page, let's deploy what we have so far so we can see our working list page. So to deploy, we can open the terminal in VS Code and run the following command: sked artifacts mobile-extension upsert, then our f flag, which points to our state file, so account contacts.mobileextension.json, then the alias for the environment that we want to push to. In my case, it's called demo1. We will also need a job created and dispatched to the user we're logged in as, making sure the job is associated with an account that has one or many contacts. So if we now go and open our dispatch job, you will see the account contacts mobile extension is available, and when we open it, we can see the list of contacts associated with the account, along with their title and primary contact information. Okay, so now that we have that up and running, let's turn our attention to the second page. This is what determines the UI once we tap on a contact in the list. First off, you will see that this page type is set to flat, as it's going to be used for the creation of or update to a single contact record. The upsert object really deals with the configuration of inserting or updating a contact. So in this case, you will see we have insert and update properties for adding and editing contacts. We've also set the ask when back property to true. This will simply display a prompt to the user if they want to save the data on the page, if they attempt to navigate away before pressing save. The next item in our UI def file is the delete configuration. For the purposes of this example, I'm not going to spend too much time on this as it typically doesn't need to be modified, but just quickly let's talk through it. As you probably guessed, this controls if a user is able to delete the contact record. The text property and everything within the confirm object deals with the text that is displayed on screen, and you can follow those through to the language file. So that really just leaves us with the can delete expression, which is the logic used to determine if the user is able to delete the record. It's entirely up to you if you want to give your users or a subset of your users the ability to delete records though. If you didn't want the option at all, you'd simply just remove the entire delete object. And finally, the items array. Whilst this is the most verbose part of our JSON file, it's actually just the same UI component listed multiple times. In this example, we want to give our users some additional detail about the contact, as well as give them the ability to update data if it's incorrect. So in addition to their name, title, and phone number, which we are presenting on the list page, we also want to display phone, mobile, and email details. And so we need to bind a UI component to each of our contact fields. In this example, we're actually using the same component for each field, which is the text editor component. You can see a list of all the UI components available for flat pages as well as all their configuration options on our doc site. But let me talk you through what we have here. The first piece of data we wanted to display is the contact's first name. So we've added the text editor UI component. The value expression is the magic that binds our UI component to the first name field, which is then defined in our instance fetch.json file. Whenever we are referencing a single item from our instance fetch query on a flat page, we prefix the field name with page data. So in this case, page data.firstname. And you'll see all the UI components are configured in the same way, except each one deals with a different field we want on our page. The remaining configuration options I've used are title, placeholder, and caption, largely just to demonstrate where and how they show up on a flat page. So if we look at first name, we can see that the title is what we want to show up just above the input, so the user knows which field they are manipulating or viewing. So as you'd expect, the title for our first name field is set to first name. The placeholder content is what is displayed when there is no value in the field. Typically, this is when you're first creating a record, but it also may be something seen when there is missing data. And finally, the caption is shown directly underneath the input and is always displayed. From there, it's largely just a job of copying and pasting down the text editor UI component until you have one for each field you want to display on screen, remembering to bind them to the correct field and to ensure that you've configured your language file for each of them. And that's all there is to our second page. Now let's assume for a moment that we've had a request to make the title of the contact read-only. We can do this in a couple of ways, but my preferred way of doing this is just by adding one more property to our UI component called read-only and set that to true. You could alternatively use the read-only UI component, which is available in our docs, but I prefer doing it this way as it means I can quickly implement this request without having to change the component that I'm actually using. Once that's done, just like before, let's run our deployment command. So sked artifacts mobile-extension upsert with the F flag pointing to our state file and the name of our environment that we're deploying to via the alias flag. And once that's deployed, we can now go check in on our form. You can now see that when we select an item from the list, we get all the fields we want presented, and the title attribute is grayed out, which is exactly what we were looking for.
Well, there you have it. You've now hopefully got a couple of mobile extensions built and deployed using the Skedulo CLI. Now, just before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you of some helpful resources that you can use as you continue on your mobile extension journey. Firstly, everything we've done in this Getting Started series is available in the Skedulo Plus examples repo on GitHub. And secondly, our doc site has detailed reference information on the mobile extensions framework, including all the different mobile UI components that you have available, so worth spending some time looking over that information too. And finally, thank you for joining me on this series around mobile extension development. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I hope you've learnt a lot and are looking forward to creating some of your own mobile extensions in the near future. Take care.